Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for for the words, and just wanted to acknowledge Chief Jennifer too for warm reception, and and Jason as well. It's always good to catch up with Jason, someone who I actually helped formulate public policy back in the day around water power. This afternoon, I just wanted to pass over some slides here about the update and maybe the purpose around the roads around the Ring of Fire and some of the changes that are happening legislatively, both Ontario and the federal government. I think, as most may know, there's two communities that are embarking on an environmental impact assessment for three major undertakings. And why are they doing that? Why are these communities? Is that me or? Yeah. Test 1, 2. What am I using? This or this? This? All right. Feedback. So Webequie and Marten Falls won a road. And so Marten Falls has been at it for a couple decades, where they've been studying routes and the possibility and sharing their aspirations about being highway connected. And Webequie wanted to ensure that they have a road to the proposed mine site and exploration activities so their members can drive home at night. So they can drive to work and drive back home. That's the primary purpose, but also to improve the quality of life for their members. But the underlying reason why they wanted to drive the environmental impact assessment is because they wanted to generate the information to make an informed decision. I'll say that again. You know, it's one thing to do a baseline study of all the disciplines involved with that, and then put a load on top of that, natural conditions, and trying to understand what the total impact is. And so in order to do that, you have to design your environmental impact assessment plan. And so they said, well, we're the communities involved in this area. We use that land, and there's no better people to lead an environmental impact assessment than us, the Indigenous people. And so they took that principle, brought it to Ontario, and they said, we want to do this. We want to partner with you in supporting this initiative, this Indigenous-led environmental impact assessment. They're doing this so they can actually make an informed decision. So they can balance out what are the impacts and what it's going to be the benefits. And the only way you do that is actually lead impact assessment. Test 1, 2. Okay. So this is just a schematic of the project governance that's involved here. There's a strategic level, there's an operational level, the members, the working group, the chief and councils are all involved, and then we execute. So I'm one of the co-leads for the Northern Road Link. I'm the lead for the Webequie Supply Road. My counterpart in Marten Falls is Qasim Sadiq. He leads the Community Access Road. This is the three roads. The top road is the Webequie Supply Road, the pink. The bottom is the Marten Falls Community Access Road, and the middle part is the latest project that the two communities are embarking on. It's called the Northern Road Link. All three projects have distinct purposes. Marten Falls is going to build their road regardless of what Ring of Fire goes or not. They want an access road. They want to drive out of their community and drive back in. Webequie Supply Road is more an economic development road, a very distinct purpose. And then the Northern Road Link specific purpose is really for an industrial road to unlock the economics and potential in the Ring of Fire. So that Northern Road Link is the one that's being co-led by the two communities, ensuring that the impacts are going to be measured based on what they think. It's the most extensive and expensive set of studies ever done in this region. We're probably spending $50 to $60 million on baseline and effects assessment and preliminary engineering on this area. And why is that? It's because it is an Indigenous-led project. They're not lowering the standards, they're actually enhancing the standards and what they want to study. So I show this slide because this is one segment of the Northern Road Link. We have to cross the Attawapskat River. So the Attawapskat River has 12 alternative segments. And I'm just showing this to show the complexity involved in any undertaking like this. So those that may have never done an undertaking, a major project, I'm just showing you what the communities have to think through just across a river. So there's 12 segments. Each segment's 2 kilometers wide in alignment within this 2-kilometer corridor. And 2 kilometers is long. And within 2 kilometers, you got to find a road. So various combinations are possible in these alternative corridors. So how is the alternative assessment done? So with all these combinations and possible permutations of the roads, like how do you come up with a decision framework? So you got to go through what the alternative assessment. So advantages, disadvantages. You use very sophisticated software among multiple criteria to determine which routing is the best one to go through. It's not like winter roads. The realignment of the winter roads that you see all across the Anishinaabe Nation, all they're doing is getting off the borders of water. Like they're getting off the lakes, off the rivers, going to higher, drier ground so they can actually realign their winter roads without depending on the freezing of the water. So it's not like that. That's a very simple exercise. When you're following the rules, the provincial, federal rules, it becomes a very layered set of complexity you have to deal with. So I'm just showing you this because we're trying to figure out the location of the segment, the corridor segments on this, on a number of different factors. So you go through this exercise, and I'm just showing you what we do in one permutations, accommodations. And then you got to look at all these factors. So factors are just a cluster of criterias. So the indigenous land use and interest, you have indigenous lands, resource use, substance use. The natural environment is another factor, the socioeconomic environment, or what you call the people studies, the physical environment, the technical considerations. The technical considerations around the engineering. You take all these factors, and then you got to put a weighting on it. How are you going to come up with a decision? So there's indicators that you have to use and how you're going to measure these criteria. So number of trap lines, number of bridges, number of berthing sites, number of portages, for the indigenous land use and interest. I'm just giving you a sample. The natural environments, number of nurseries, habitats for caribou, etc. And then you put weightings around it. And then the computer, depending on the weighting, if you put 50% high rating for indigenous land use versus the caribou, then the trade-off is there. So what does that mean? You want to go over here because you're trying to avoid some indigenous land use utilization patterns here. So you're going to go over here, but there's a caribou one habitat area over here. So you got to come off with the trade-offs in all these different criterias. And I'm just showing you a very simple example of what that is. So they go through it. So blending, Western and indigenous science is not an easy exercise because indigenous knowledge touches every one of those value components. Touches every one of them. touches how they exercise their Aboriginal treaty rights. It touches the physical environment. It touches the biological environment, the socioeconomic. So as an Indigenous community, these two First Nations, as they move forward step by step, using their values, their principles in this undertaking is not an easy exercise. There's layers of complexity that they work through, and they've been at it for several years. We're in year number 7. And I say that to you because when you read in the news, you think there's some kind of carbon bomb, as they call it, happening. They think there's some... the two communities is the only environmental impact assessment being done in the Ring of Fire. No mines are undertaking an environmental impact assessment. It's only the two communities. So when you see a map of all the mining claims, take away the mining claims and put in what the actual active camps are, you'll see 2 dots. That's all you see. That's the activity. We're the activity with the helicopters going out there doing field studies. So I say that to you because I'm the project manager for the environmental impact assessment. And as we're doing this with the community and the participation of the community, because you probably have, well, how is the community participating? They actually created the route based on their Indigenous knowledge. The easiest route, technically, geographically, was to go straight south into the Ring of Fire. They didn't want that. Why? Because there were sacred grounds there. So that's why the route is squiggly, because we were guided by the land users and the elders in that exercise. So, changes in the air. We just had a first Premier's session out west in Saskatchewan, and it was basically a dragon's den of nation-building projects. It was interesting to see all these premiers, every premier pitching the Prime Minister, our project should be a list of nation-building projects, which is very, very interesting. So how is the federal government responding to the Prime Minister's aspirations to get the economy going and not be so dependent on the U.S. market? Well, we had a meeting with the federal agency, the Impact Assessment Agency. It was the President, the Vice President, the Director General, and they were telling us that we're going to do a focus review of your project. So because Marten Falls has submitted their draft report to the Indigenous communities and the public review, ours are coming out June 9th, the Webequie Supply Road for a 120-day review, and Northern Rural Link is probably about 2 years. But they're already saying we're going to have a focus review of the project. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So even though you told us to study this, you're going to have a focus review and maybe a light review, I guess, on the rest of the project? Well, no. We're going to rely on Ontario assessment regime for your project. I said, well, that's interesting because we got Bill 5. So Bill 5, you know, on the changes in the legislation, we're talking to the directors of Species at Risk and the Ministry of Environment, and they're just as uncertain as everybody else what this actually means in practice. And as a project proponent, I get calls. As a speaker in Vancouver last week at an Indigenous forum with a large Ontario delegation, the forum being the Indigenous Centre for Cumulative Effects, and I'm doing a presentation on these projects. Of course, they're going to ask me, well, what do you think about Bill 5? They're gutting, these words they're using. And I said, well, I can see your worry. If you have a distrust with industry, they're going to follow some lower standard. Remember, because this is the situation. The federal government said they're going to do a focus review. I call it a de-scoping, but they don't like that word. I don't care what they don't like. I said they're going to rescope or descope the review. So they told us to study this. Our report's 3,000 pages. That's the main report, and several thousand more in the appendices. So they're going to focus this, rely on Ontario, on their tools for assessment, and I can see why the First Nations may be a little concerned when it comes to industry. I'm not concerned as an Indigenous-led project. If you're an Indigenous co-proponent, Indigenous proponent of projects, you don't have to follow and meet the Ontario Code. You exceed it. So I'm not that worried, because you exceed what they're offering as an Indigenous-led project. So what I mean by that, when you get down to it, it's about the mitigation measures. So if you're worried somehow they're going to do away with mitigation measures, I'm not worried about that, because we're trying to exceed and have the best mitigation measures in the effects assessment of our roads. I think that's where we're going. Like, I don't think they care. You listen to the working group of Webequie, they said, we're not here to follow rules, we're here to do our project based on our standards and our codes. And they're going to protect their environment the way they think is going to be, even if it costs extra money, they said. And so the standards of MTO, standards of MECP, they're trying to exceed it. They're not trying to meet it. So that's the benefit of an Indigenous-led project. You know, that really is the benefit that, you know, of participating in projects. And I see this, you know, for those communities that are involved. We're not, you know, I wish I could share a conversation. I wish I could record it, why it took a year as an Indigenous-led project to integrate the Indigenous principles with the provincial principles and the federal principles. The regulators had a hard time wrapping their head around that. They were just used to their own principles. And to have a blended approach, this 2I scene that they're talking about, I come up here sharing you our experience around that. Trying to integrate the Indigenous set of principles in all the principles and practices of the regulators in Ontario and the federal government. I'm not that worried as the project manager. There's other elements maybe they're most worried about. The economic zones, I don't know what, and they're talking about the Indigenous economic zones, and they're asking, well, what does that mean? Who cares what they think, what it means? Why don't you define it? You as Indigenous communities, you define it. The thinking around allowing other peoples to define your lands, you know, and who you are, those days I think are over. So Webequie continues on, and we'll navigate those changes, because we are on a day-by-day cases, and we'll wait to see what the new legislation and the new regulations come about. But at the end of the day, they're going to exceed it. And that's the beauty about Indigenous-led projects. Thank you. We got you.